The training hall smelled like metal and sweat. High ceilings stretched up into darkness, and the floor was covered in thick mats that could take the impact of falling bodies. Light came from glowing panels along the walls, casting everything in a pale blue color that made the room feel cold. Myra pressed her back against the far wall and tried to make herself small. She was good at that. 8 years of practice had taught her how to fade into the background, how to become invisible when she needed to be. And right now, standing in a room full of alien children who could probably kill her without trying, invisible seemed like a very good thing to be. The other students moved through their warm-up exercises in the center of the hall. They were all young like her, but that was where the similarities ended. Was covered in short golden fur, her body built like a cat but standing upright on 2 legs. Her eyes were large and yellow, and when she moved, it was with a grace that made Myra think of water flowing over stones. Looked more like a wolf, with gray fur and a long snout filled with teeth that showed when he panted. He moved in quick, sharp motions, always watching everything around him. Was the largest of the cubs, a young with dark green scales and a ridge of small spines running down his back. He moved slowly and carefully, as if he was always thinking before he acted. They were all predators, real predators with claws and fangs and bodies designed for hunting. And then there was Myra, a human girl with thin arms and pale skin and lungs that sometimes forgot how to work properly. She didn't belong here, she knew that, everyone knew that. The door at the front of the hall slid open, and an instructor walked in. The room went quiet immediately. Even the cubs who had been talking stopped mid-sentence. Was a full-grown, standing nearly 8 feet tall. His scales were the color of old bronze in dozens of places from battles Myra couldn't imagine. His eyes were yellow with vertical black pupils, and they swept across the room like searchlights looking for something wrong. They found Myra almost immediately. She felt his gaze land on her like a physical weight. He didn't say anything, didn't even change his expression, but something in those cold eyes made her stomach twist into a knot. "Line up," said. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. The cubs scrambled into formation. Myra pushed away from the wall and hurried to join them, taking her usual spot at the very end of the line. She was always last. It was safer there. Walked slowly down the line, inspecting each student. He stopped in front of and nodded slightly. He paused before and grunted in what might have been approval. When he reached, he said nothing at all, but there was something like pride in the way he looked at the young. Then he reached Myra. He stopped walking. For a long moment, he just stood there, looking down at her. Myra kept her eyes fixed on a point somewhere around his chest. Looking in the eyes was considered a challenge, and she had learned very quickly not to challenge instructor. "The human," he said. It wasn't a question. He said it the way someone might say the dirt or the garbage. "Yes, instructor," Myra said quietly. "Still here?" "Yes, instructor." He made a sound low in his throat. It might have been a laugh. It didn't sound friendly. "We will see for how long." He moved on, and Myra let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The training session began, led them through a series of combat stances, showing them how to position their bodies for defense and attack. The cubs picked up the movements quickly. Their bodies were built for this kind of thing, muscles and claws and reflexes that humans could only dream of. Myra tried to follow along. She really did. But her arms shook when she held them up too long, and her legs started to burn after just a few minutes of holding a stance. Her chest felt tight, and she could hear her own breathing getting louder and faster. She fell behind. She always fell behind. Noticed, he always noticed. "The human struggles," he announced to the class, not even looking at her. "This is what happens when prey animals try to learn the ways of predators." Some of the cubs shifted uncomfortably. Others laughed quietly. Myra's face burned with shame, but she kept trying. She kept holding the stance even though her body screamed at her to stop. Humans are what we call persistence predators, continued, his voice dripping with scorn. Do you know what that means? It means they are too weak to catch their prey quickly, too slow, too soft, so they must chase their prey for hours, for days, until it collapses from exhaustion. He turned and looked directly at Myra. What kind of predator cannot even catch its food? This is not strength. This is desperation. Myra's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall. She would not cry in front of him. She would not give him that satisfaction. The session continued for another hour. By the end, Myra's legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. Her lungs burned, and each breath felt like she was trying to inhale through a straw. But she didn't quit. She didn't sit down. She stayed in line until dismissed them. The cubs scattered quickly, heading for the showers or the dining hall. Myra walked slowly to a corner of the training room and sat down on a bench. She needed a minute, just 1 minute to catch her breath before she tried to walk home. She closed her eyes and focused on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and steady. Her doctor had taught her that years ago when the respiratory problems first started. Are you dying? Myra's eyes snapped open. Was standing a few feet away, her golden fur catching the light. Her head was tilted to one side, and her large yellow eyes were fixed on Myra with an expression that was hard to read. What? Myra managed. You're breathing. It sounds wrong, like something is broken inside you. Ears flicked back. I have never heard prey make that sound before. Usually they just die. I'm not dying, Myra said. I just need a minute. A minute for what? To catch my breath. Blink slowly. You cannot hold your own breath. No, it's not, Myra shook her head. I have a condition. My lungs don't work right. Sometimes I need to rest. Continued to stare at her. Then why are you here, in the training program? It was a fair question. Myra had asked herself the same thing many times. My parents work here, she said. On 4, they're diplomats. They're supposed to be here for 2 years. She paused to take another breath. And humans don't leave their children behind, not if they can help it. So you were brought here against your will. No, Myra shook her head again. I wanted to come. My parents gave me the choice. They said I could stay on Earth with my grandmother if I wanted, but I didn't want to be away from them for 2 years, and I thought maybe. She trailed off. Maybe what? Myra looked down at her hands. They were small and soft, without claws or scales or fur, completely useless in a fight. I thought maybe I could learn something, get stronger, prove that I could do it. She let out a short, bitter laugh. Stupid, right? Didn't answer immediately. She sat down on the bench next to Myra, keeping a careful distance between them. For a while, neither of them spoke. Instructor says humans are weak, said finally. Instructor isn't wrong. He says you don't belong here. Myra's throat tightened. He's probably right about that too. His tail swished slowly behind her. My mother is a hunter, one of the best in our clan. She taught me that there are different kinds of strength. The strength to kill quickly, yes, but also the strength to wait, the strength to endure, the strength to keep going when everything tells you to stop. Myra looked up at her. I don't know if you have that kind of strength, continued. I don't know you, but I know that you are still here, even though everyone tells you that you don't belong, even though your own body fights against you. She stood up and looked down at Myra with those strange yellow eyes. That is something, I think. Before Myra could respond, turned and walked away. Her golden fur disappeared through the door, and Myra was alone again. She sat there for a long time thinking about what had said. It didn't change anything. She was still weak. She was still human. She still didn't belong. But she was still here. When she finally stood up and walked out of the training hall, her legs were still shaking. Her lungs were still burning. But somewhere deep inside her chest, in a place that had nothing to do with her breathing problems, something small and stubborn refused to give up. She would be back tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. Because that was what humans did. They didn't give up on their young. They didn't give up on each other. And they didn't give up on themselves. The next week came too fast. Myra spent her days trying to practice the stances in her small room, using a mirror to check her form. She was getting better, she thought, or at least she was getting better at ignoring the pain. On the last day before the sparring exercise, instructor made an announcement that sent ice through her veins. "Next class we begin full contact sparring," he said, his yellow eyes sweeping across the room. "You will fight. You will bleed. You will learn what it means to face an opponent who wants to hurt you." His gaze found Myra in the back of the room. "All of you will participate, no exceptions." That night, Myra lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling. Her heart was beating too fast, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She was going to get hurt, she knew that, maybe badly. But she also knew that she wasn't going to quit. Because quitting wasn't what humans did. The morning of the sparring exercise arrived gray and cold. Clouds covered the sky outside the training hall, and a light rain fell against the windows. Myra stood in the changing room, pulling on her training clothes with hands that trembled slightly. She had barely slept the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw instructor standing over her, his claws raised. She took a deep breath and walked into the training hall. The other cubs were already there, stretching and talking in low voices. The mood was different today. There was an energy in the air, something sharp and electric. Even, who usually seemed relaxed and easygoing, was packing back and forth with his ears pressed flat against his head. Caught Myra's eye as she entered. The nodded once, a small gesture that might have meant good luck or might have meant goodbye. Myra wasn't sure which. She took her place at the back of the room, trying to stay calm. Her lungs were behaving today, which was something. At least she wouldn't have to fight while struggling to breathe. The door opened, and instructor walked in. He was wearing different clothes today. Instead of his usual instructor's uniform, he wore close-fitting training gear that showed off the heavy muscles beneath his scales. He looked bigger somehow, more dangerous, like a weapon that had finally been taken out of its case. "Today you become warriors," he said, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "Today you learn what it means to fight not for sport but for survival. There will be pain. There will be blood. If you cannot handle this, leave now." Nobody moved. "Good," smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "We begin." He started calling out pairs, and a small cub named, and another, and a nearly his own size. One by one, the cubs stepped onto the mats and faced each other. The fights were brutal. These were young predators and they fought like it. Claws raked through fur. Teeth snapped at throats. Bodies slammed against the mats hard enough to shake the floor. But there were rules. No killing blows. No permanent damage. When one fighter submitted or was pinned, the match ended. Myra watched from the back, her heart pounding. She studied every fight, memorizing the stances, the movements, the way the cubs shifted their weight before they attacked. She had been doing this for weeks now, watching from the back while everyone else trained. She knew she couldn't match their strength or speed, but maybe, just maybe, she could predict what they would do. The matches continued. Cubs won and lost. Some walked away with nothing but bruises. Others had to be helped off the mat, bleeding from cuts that would need treatment. Through it all, watched with cold satisfaction. Finally, everyone had fought. Everyone except Myra. Turned and looked at her. That terrible smile was back on his face. "We have one student remaining," he said, "but no partner for her to face." Myra's stomach dropped. "It would be unfair to make her sit out," continued, his voice carrying false concern. "She might feel left out, excluded. We cannot have that." He stepped onto the mat. "I will demonstrate proper technique," he said. "The human will be my partner." A murmur ran through the watching cubs. This wasn't normal. Instructors didn't spar with students. The size difference alone made it absurd. was nearly 3 times Myra's size, with decades of combat experience. She was an 8-year-old girl with breathing problems. But no one protested, no one said anything. Myra walked to the mat on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Her heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them to be still. She stopped at the edge of the mat and looked up at instructor. "Assume your stance," he said. Myra slid her feet apart. She raised her hands the way she had practiced in her room in front of the mirror night after night. She bent her knees slightly. She probably looked ridiculous, a small, soft human trying to look like a fighter. But her stance was correct. She had learned it by watching from the back of the room, memorizing every detail because she knew she would never be able to practice with the others. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. He hadn't expected that. "Begin," he said. He moved fast, faster than anything Myra had ever seen. One moment he was standing 3 feet away, and the next his arm was swinging toward her head with enough force to break bones. She tried to dodge. She was too slow. The blow caught her on the shoulder and sent her spinning across the mat. She hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Pain exploded through her body, sharp and bright. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world was spinning, and all she could hear was ringing in her ears. Then slowly, she put her hands on the mat and pushed herself up. Was watching her. The smile was gone from his face. "Stay down," he said. "You have lost." Myra got to her feet. Her shoulders screamed in protest. Her legs were shaking, but she raised her hands and assumed her stance again. His eyes narrowed. He struck again. This time a sweeping kick that took her legs out from under her. She crashed to the mat, and for a moment she just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if her ribs were broken. They weren't. She could still breathe. It hurt, but she could breathe. She rolled onto her side and pushed herself up again. "What are you doing?" demanded. There was something in his voice now, not anger exactly, something else. Myra didn't answer. She didn't have the breath for it. She just raised her hands and waited. The cubs watched in silence. His fur was standing on end, had stopped packing. Even, usually so calm, had gone rigid. Struck a third time. A straight punch to the center of her chest that lifted her off her feet and threw her backward. She landed in a heap, gasping, tears streaming down her face. Everything hurt, everything. But she could hear her father's voice in her head from years ago, when she was sick in bed and crying because she couldn't go to school like the other kids. "Women don't quit," he had said. "Your grandmother worked 3 jobs to send your mother to college. Your mother finished medical school while pregnant with you. You come from a long line of stubborn women who don't know when to give up." Myra put her hands on the mat. In the crowd made a small sound. She had seen prey animals before, plenty of them. She knew what they did when a predator had them cornered. They froze, they fled, they submitted, hopping for mercy. She had never seen one get up after being struck down 3 times. She had never seen one refuse to stay dead. Myra stood up. Her legs were barely holding her. Blood was dripping from a cut on her face, but her hands were raised, and her stance was as correct as she could make it. Stared at her. For the first time since Myra had met him, he looked uncertain. "This is pointless," he said. "You cannot win." Myra's voice came out rough and broken. "I know." "Then why continue?" She didn't have an answer. Or maybe she did, but she didn't have the words for it. She just stood there, waiting for the next blow. Felt something stirring in his chest. A feeling he couldn't name. He was a pack hunter. His instincts told him things that his brain didn't always understand. And right now, those instincts were screaming at him. This small creature was being hunted. She couldn't fight back. She couldn't run. She was going to die. And she wouldn't stop getting up. Something about that was wrong. Not wrong like bad. Wrong like it broke something he thought he understood about the universe. Raised his arm again and stepped onto the mat. Everyone froze. "This demonstration is concluded," said. His voice cracked on the last word, but he didn't back down. He stood between and Myra, his young body rigid with fear and determination. His eyes blazed with fury. "You dare challenge me, your own instructor?" "I am not challenging you," said. "I am saying the lesson is over. She has nothing more to learn from this. You forget your place, cub." No, hands were shaking, but he kept his voice steady. "You forget yours." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then stepped onto the mat. She didn't say anything. She just walked across the floor and stood next to, her golden fur bristling, her yellow eyes fixed on. Was next. He padded onto the mat and took his place beside the others, his lips pulled back to show his teeth. One by one, the other cubs followed. Some of them looked terrified. Some of them looked angry. But they all moved to stand between instructor and the small human girl who refused to stay down. Looked at them, his students, the predators he had been training to fight. And he saw something in their eyes that he recognized. They had formed a pack, a pride, a clan. And they had claimed the human as one of their own. In predator society, this meant something. It meant that she was under their protection. It meant that any attack on her was an attack on all of them. It also meant that his authority over them was broken. His jaw tightened. For a moment, Myra was sure he was going to attack anyway, sure that he was going to tear through the cubs to get to her. But he didn't. He stepped back. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his body language had changed. The fight was over. "We will speak of this later," he said. His voice was quiet now, dangerous. He turned and walked out of the training hall. The door slammed behind him. For a long moment, nobody moved. The cubs stood in a protective circle around Myra, their young bodies tense, their eyes fixed on the door. Then Myra's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the mat, and suddenly was there, and was kneeling beside her with worry in his yellow eyes. "Don't move," said. "You're injured." "I'm fine," Myra whispered. It was a lie and everyone knew it. "You're stubborn," said. "That's not the same as fine." Myra tried to laugh, but it turned into a cough. Blood spotted her lips. "We need to get her to the medical bay," said. "Help me lift her." Gentle hands picked her up. She felt fur and scales against her skin, warm bodies pressed close around her. The cubs carried her out of the training hall, moving together like they had done it 1,000 times before. Myra's eyes were closing. The pain was fading into something soft and dark. But before she lost consciousness, she heard his voice, soft and wondering. Why didn't she stay down? And his answer, equally soft. I don't think she knows how. The medical bay was clean and bright, filled with equipment that hummed quietly in the background. Myra lay on a bed with sensors attached to her chest and arms, monitoring her vital signs. A medical drone had already treated her injuries. 2 cracked ribs, heavy bruising, a mild concussion. Nothing permanent, nothing that wouldn't heal. The cubs waited outside. They weren't allowed in the treatment area, but they refused to leave. Through the window, Myra could see them sitting on the floor of the waiting room, was grooming her fur with sharp, nervous movements, was packing again, sat perfectly still, but his tail twitched every few seconds. The door opened, and Myra's parents rushed in. Her mother reached her first, tears streaming down her face. Her father was right behind, his expression caught between fear and fury. "What happened?" her mother demanded. "The school sent us a message saying you were injured during training. They said there was an incident." Myra told them. She told them everything. About instructor and his hatred for humans. About the sparring exercise. About how he had beaten her in front of the whole class. And about how the cubs had protected her. When she finished, her father's face was dark with anger. "I'm filing a complaint," he said. This is unacceptable. That creature nearly killed you." "Dad, no." He stopped. "What?" "I don't want to leave," Myra said. "I want to stay in the program." Her mother stared at her. "Myra, you were just beaten by your own teacher. Why would you want to go back?" Myra thought about the question. She thought about the training hall and the pain and the fear. She thought about instructor's cold yellow eyes and his contempt for everything human. But she also thought about sitting beside her on the bench, talking about different kinds of strength. She thought about stepping between her and his voice cracking but his body firm. She thought about teeth bared in her defense. "Because they stood up for me," she said. "All of them. They didn't have to. They could have gotten in trouble, but they did it anyway." Her parents exchanged a look. "And because I'm not done," Myra continued. "I came here to prove something, not to anyone else, to myself. I haven't done that yet." Her father's expression softened. He reached out and took her hand. "You're definitely my daughter," he said quietly, "stubborn as a mule. I learned from the best." He smiled despite himself. "We'll see what happens with the investigation, but if you want to stay, we won't force you to leave." Her mother didn't look happy about it, but she nodded. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I promise." They stayed with her until she fell asleep. When she woke up hours later, the room was dark and quiet, but through the window she could see that the cubs were still there, still waiting. Something warm spread through her chest, and it had nothing to do with her injuries. She closed her eyes and slept again, more peacefully than she had in weeks. The investigation took 3 days. Officials came from the Galactic Union to interview the students, review the training records, and examine the security footage from the sparring session. Myra answered their questions as honestly as she could, trying not to embellish or exaggerate. The cubs were interviewed separately. Myra didn't know what they said, but she heard later that had given a detailed account of instructors' behavior over the entire semester. The patterns of cruelty, the targeted harassment, the way he had singled Myra out from the very first day. On the 4th day, the verdict came down. Instructor was removed from his position, not for striking a student, which was technically permitted under training protocols, but because his own students had rejected his authority. In predator culture, that was the ultimate shame. A teacher whose students turned against him had no standing, no respect, no future. Left 4 on a transport ship that same day. Myra didn't see him go, but told her about it later. The former instructor had walked to the ship with his head down, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. All because a group of cubs had decided to protect a human girl. A new instructor arrived the following week. Her name was, and she was alike. She was smaller than, with gray fur and calm blue eyes. When she walked into the training hall for the first time, she moved with quiet confidence instead of intimidation. She looked at the cubs, she looked at Myra. "I have heard about what happened here," she said. Her voice was soft but clear. "I have read the reports, watched the recordings. I know what you did." The cubs shifted nervously. "You showed courage," continued. "You showed loyalty. You showed that you understand something many adults never learn, that strength is not just about fighting. It is about protecting those who need protection." She walked across the room and stopped in front of Myra. "You," she said, "you are the human." "Yes, instructor." Studied her for a long moment. Her blue eyes were thoughtful, without any of the contempt that had shown. "Instructor called humans persistence predators," she said. "He meant it as an insult, but do you know what I see?" Myra shook her head. "I see a species that conquered its entire planet without claws or fangs or venom. I see a species that chased prey across savannas until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. I see a species that climbed mountains, crossed oceans, and reached for the stars, not because it was easy, but because they refused to give up." She turned to address the whole class. Persistence is not weakness. Persistence is the most dangerous kind of strength, because it means that no matter how many times you knock them down, they will keep getting up. They will keep coming. They will never stop. Her eyes swept across the cubs. You learned that lesson 3 days ago. You saw it with your own eyes. A small, soft creature outmatched in every way who would not stay down. And it changed you. It made you act. It made you choose to protect instead of ignore. She smiled, showing teeth that were sharp but somehow not threatening. That is the lesson you will carry with you for the rest of your lives. Not how to strike harder or move faster, but how to recognize courage when you see it, and how to stand beside it. The training resumed, but it was different now. Taught them the same techniques, the same stances, the same combat skills. But she also taught them other things. She taught them about honor and loyalty, about the responsibility of the strong to protect the weak, about the difference between being a predator and being a monster. Myra still trained at the back. She was still the slowest and weakest student. Her lungs still gave her trouble, and she still needed to rest more often than the others. But things had changed. Now when she fell behind, slowed down to match her pace. When she needed to rest, sat beside her and kept her company. When other students looked at her with contempt, growled at them until they backed away. She wasn't just the human anymore. She was their human, part of their pack, part of their pride. And Myra found that she was learning things too. Not just the combat techniques, which she practiced until her body ached, but other things. How to communicate with species who thought differently than humans. How to understand the body language of predators. How to be brave even when she was terrified. Weeks passed, then months. The rainy season ended and the sun came out over 4. The training grew harder, but Myra grew stronger. Not faster or more powerful, but more determined, more stubborn, more human. One day, near the end of the term, found her sitting alone after training. Myra's breathing was rough, but she was smiling. "You look happy," said, sitting beside her. "I finished the whole session today," Myra said. "First time ever. I didn't have to stop once." His ears perked up. "That is good. You have improved much." "Still the worst in the class." "Yes, but the best at being the worst." Myra laughed. It felt good to laugh. She hadn't done it enough lately. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You may ask. I may not answer." "That day, when you stepped onto the mat? Why did you do it? You could have gotten in serious trouble. You could have been expelled." Was quiet for a long moment. Her tail swished slowly behind her. "I have been thinking about that," she said finally. "About why I moved. I did not plan it. I did not decide. My body simply moved." "But why?" Turned to look at her. Those yellow eyes, which had once seemed so alien and frightening, now looked almost warm. "Because you would not stay down," she said. "Because you were beaten and bloody and broken, and you kept getting up. It was the bravest thing I had ever seen. And I realized that I could not just watch it happen. I could not stand there and do nothing while someone like you was destroyed." She paused. "My mother told me once that courage is contagious. That when you see someone being brave, it makes you want to be brave too. I think that is what happened. You were so brave that you made all of us brave." Myra didn't know what to say. Her eyes were stinging and she blinked rapidly. "I wasn't brave," she whispered. "I was terrified." "Yes," said, "that is what makes it courage." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set through the windows of the training hall. The sky turned orange and pink and purple, colors that looked almost the same on every world Myra had ever seen. After a while and joined them. They didn't say anything. They just sat down nearby, close enough to touch, and watched the sunset together. 4 young predators and 1 human girl. A pack, a pride, a family. Myra thought about what instructor had said, about persistence being the most dangerous kind of strength, about humans who conquered planets and crossed oceans and reached for stars. She thought about her grandmother working 3 jobs, her mother finishing medical school while pregnant, her father negotiating peace treaties on alien worlds. She thought about herself, 8 years old and sick and scared, standing in a training hall full of creatures who could kill her without trying, and getting up every single time. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she would ever be a great fighter or a powerful warrior. She would probably always be the slowest and weakest in any room she entered. But she knew one thing for certain. She would never stop getting up. And somehow, impossibly, she had taught the predators the same thing. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was human.